So I was editing photos on my iPad the other day with Luna, my little Pyrenees puppy, and then a random question just popped in my head as I was editing, and that was, which board game am I most looking forward to in 2021? But then I thought about posing that question to all of you, and here today we're going to talk about 21 of your most anticipated board games next year. Let's get started. Okay, so today's going to be a pretty chill hangout today. We're just going to go through each game one by one, starting out first with everyone on Instagram, and then we'll switch on over to Twitter halfway through. So grab a cup of coffee, some orange juice, water, milk, whatever your beverage of choice is right now. And as I'm going through each and every board game, if it's on your most anticipated list for 2021, let me know down in the comments below. Actually, thinking about it, if you had to pick one board game that you are the most excited about for next year, comment down below which one it is. Okay, so the first one comes from Friday Night Games Official, and he mentions Mind MGMT. So this game was actually made by someone that I know, who is Senfung Lim, who has countlessly supported my work and shared my videos and photos across social media. So if you're listening in, my friend, thank you so much for all that you do. And I'm excited about your game. So Mind MGMT is a psychic espionage game. It's a hidden movement game, and here's how it works. So one player is going to play as the recruiter, and they're going to pre-program their moves behind a screen, which is thematically called a mental screen. Now their goal is to move to a location that matches 1 out of 3 feature cards that they drew during the setup. Now everyone else is going to be the rogue agent, so there's only one recruiter. And then it switches over to the agent's turn, where they can perform 1 out of 3 actions. They can either ask the recruiter if they've ever been on the location with a certain feature like a tiki's head. I'll pop up all the screenshots over here on the left side or right side for you guys. It also looks like agents can also do a shakedown where they try to deduce one of the recruiter's secret feature cards. And lastly, agents can also capture the recruiter. If that happens, then the recruiter loses. I think one of the coolest features of this game is one of these sealed packages here. So how this works is the loser of each game gets to open one of these sealed packages, and inside is going to contain some new components, new abilities, and even new rules on top of a mini comic included as well. The artwork in this game also is super cool. I love the whole comic book, kind of cartoony, old school retro detective vibe that's prevalent throughout all of the components. Now I also like how it's not totally flat, so the base game actually adds some 3D elements to it, like the recruit meeples, some various tokens. Now normally I'm kind of whatever about dry erase markers on a board game, but I think it fits the theme very well here because of the whole detective, Sherlock deduction type feel for this overall, and you're kind of deriving clues from each other. So I feel like here in this instance, the dry erase marker fits very, very well. The deluxe version also is very cool. It has this fold out wallet. I've never seen Game Trace design something that unique before, and I love how it's not just a box. It actually feels like you're opening a comic and diving into it. Man, I really wish I heard about this game early on because I 100% would have backed it if I knew about the campaign. But overall, thank you so much for the recommendation. I'm excited, as you are, Friday Night Games, for this one coming out next year. Now, let's move on to number 2. So number 2 actually was one that I was thinking of right away when I was thinking about my most anticipated board game for 2021. But a lot of others agreed as well, and they posted their responses, similar thing. And that game is Frostpunk. If you haven't heard of Frostpunk, you are in for a treat. Thematically, it is a steampunk game that is taking place in winter. Technically, it's an ice age that's hit a post-apocalyptic age of humankind, but the components, the color schemes, everything revolves around that gritty, iron-forged, cold setting, and I love it. It looks so good. It is one of the coolest themes that I have seen in a board game, and I have yet to own any kind of steampunk-themed board game, so I'm super excited about this one. If I had access to like a winter mountain environment that's practical and that's achievable to film in, oh my god, this game looks so good. I'll just die from excitement. Okay, so the goal of Frostpunk is to survive over the course of 12 days. Each day is going to bring about a brand new event, and you need to address the concerns of your citizens. Now, sometimes your citizens will be unhappy, sometimes they'll be hopeful. Regardless, their mood actually gets tracked on a mood board. There are also a ton of factors that have to be accounted for as well, like weather. If a blizzard hits, then you have to account for that by building structures better than tents, for example. and also consuming more coal. Now, speaking of coal, you actually put coal in this crazy cool generator that's not mini at all. It's called a miniature. It's 100% not a miniature. It looks ginormous. And what it does is actually produces heat for your citizens thematically. And it even has a compartment at the bottom. So if your cubes get stuck in it, then it represents heat, I think. And then if it falls out, then it represents damage to the generator. Now, on top of that, it looks like there's a bunch of other very interesting mechanisms at play. It looks very involved, from all the actions to sickness, exploration, hunger, shelters. There are unique player roles. The appreciated resources, it looks so cool. Like there are actually even stacks of coal and trees instead of individual cubes. I love games like that. I love games with unique resources. So yeah, for me, definitely Frostpunk, one of my most anticipated games for 2021, along with many, many others. Can't wait for it, and hopefully it holds up to what was shown in the campaign. Number 3, mentioned to me by KevMC1, said Isla and Something Shiny. Now, right away, the artwork in this game stands out. I love fantasy-themed games, and I think actually those are my favorite themes by far. This definitely looks along the same lines as Everdell and Root in terms of the whole woodsy, whimsical animals for artwork, which I think looks very amazing. Very amazing. So I think it is intended for like a small adventuring experience or solo. And also looks like it's played in chapters, but each chapter also has its own set of cards, rules, and goals. Now I do wonder though how long those chapters play out and if you can still revisit the game and play it over differently after completing all the campaigns, because 5 does seem a little bit short, but I do like how it is progressive, because for me, combat is one thing that I always look for in a board game. And it seems like combat doesn't get introduced here until chapter 2, which I think is great because it feels like you're progressing with your character through a narrative as intended. Well, yeah, overall, I love the artwork. It looks very fun. It looks like a lighthearted game, and it looks very family friendly, which is awesome. I think it'd be a fun way to also introduce some RPG elements to younger players. And thank you for the recommendation. Okay, moving on to the next one, and that is number 4. Now, number 4, we don't know too much about just yet, but it was recommended to me by rhombus.games, and that game is the Forest of Pangaea. So I'm just gonna go off the 2 photos that I'm looking at here. Now, first is the cover art, which has an insane amount of detail. So showing this very, very vibrant green forest for those that are listening into the podcast. There's sunlight kind of brushing on to different tree branches, and there's just so much vivid detail of the forest, from the shadows to like the sunlight. Nature has a very, very strong vibe in this game, and I love that. It just looks like a very lush, lively forest, and the one description that I did find actually is that it is a competitive, check for me, game about trees. I like trees. Forests. I take pictures of forests all the time. And magic. Yeah, so I'm 100% on board. And the meeples also of the trees for the second photo look very different. There are a bunch of different tree meeples, but I think this is the first time that I see it crafted with wooden bases and also different colors for both the bases, like the tree trunk, and for the leaves. So the leaves are all in green, along with some other meeple cylindrical colored markers. So I can't wait to find out more about this game, and I'm definitely looking forward to it as well. I can't wait to see what else is going to be released about it in the Kickstarter launch that's projected to be in spring of 2021. Thank you for Rhombus Games for letting me know about that one. Now, number 5 is from East01A, who mentions Anno 1800. Now, a couple other games on this list are also based off of video games, so they were translated from the video game. But I actually had no idea that Anno 1800 was based off of a game made by Ubisoft, actually, and I'm not too big on historical games in general, but the components of this one look very, very cool. It's the first time I'm actually seeing gold bars made for resources. It would be nice though if this was part of the base game. Hopefully they're not just custom upgrades, because they look so cool, and again, I love custom unique resources. Looks like the goal of this game is to develop your own civilization, who initially are okay with living on bread and clothing, but progressively they're going to demand some more luxurious upgrades. So that means you're going to be distributing different professions like farmers, engineers, investors, and ultimately your goal is to create the most prosperous island. Now, despite it being a historical themed game, I do love city builders. I do love development. I have yet to play Suburbia, but my biggest question though is, how is the player interaction for this game? Because I'm wondering, is your city development kind of independent from other players, or are there different events that occur, or maybe the way you gather resources and use them, are they involved with other players? That's a really big one for me. I'm really big on player interaction, so hopefully players are very involved with each other, whether it's through like sabotage or through resource allocation and like prioritization. Hopefully there's some mechanisms there that are introduced so players are just constantly interacting and annoying each other. That would be a winner for me. Now, number 6 is by Vulture JP Caldera, and that is Wonderlands War. And I've definitely heard about this one. I'm sure it's going to be great because it is by Druid City Games, who I'm a big fan of. I actually have title blades here in my closet, sitting there, waiting to be opened and filmed. I've also covered Grim Forest from before, and that's one of my favorite gateway games that I introduced to new players. So I'm sure Wonderlands War is no exception to all the great titles that they've been releasing so far. So in Wonderlands War, the game itself is themed around Alice in Wonderland. It is an area control game where you'll be gathering supporters in really important locations in Wonderland, and you'll also be drafting cards from the Tea Party to grow your army. Every time there's an army involved, I am just instantly hooked for a board game. Now that also reminds me of Small World. Small World is one of my favorite games of all time. So Wonderlands War is definitely shaping up to have some key enticing features here. Now what's also really appealing about Wonderlands War here is that you have a ton of other ways to make important decisions as well, from forging powerful artifacts to using your army chips to wage decisive battles, and there are even quests which are designed to help you earn points even if you lost the battle. Now, I don't know how battles work just yet in this game, but I do like how they've at least thought of the catch-up mechanic, because it's never fun for anyone to be in like last place and to have no way to at least make a dent on the victory point track and to catch up with the leader or just with other players in general, because then that just dissuades them and kind of pushes them away from the game. So I do like catch-up mechanics here, and I do like how it's at least being thought of for this game. It also seems like players are constantly engaged in gameplay even if they're losing in battles. So maybe there's a good mix of PvP and PvE, which is very, very promising. Now, components, I'm always looking to see whether games have unique components like the resources I mentioned earlier. And here again, it's really cool because they have these black gems called Madness Shards. They also have some custom inserts from game trays. Speaking of, I love game trays. Like somehow they never disappoint when it comes to organizing each game to not just fit the components perfectly, but to also arrange them in a way that's just so easy to put back. That's the part that gets neglected often in board games. Like, yes, it may be packaged nicely and it gets to you in a way that protects all the components, but some games is just so hard to put back because nothing is labeled. It's just difficult to clean it well. And anywho, despite the rant, there are also faction bags, some custom colored and shaped meeples. You also have unique player boards with a ton of minis and lots of really, really fun, whimsical stuff that goes straight along the lines of Alice in Wonderland. And I'm sure that this game is going to be a hit next year as well. Now, number 7 is from Throw the Die. And the most anticipated game mentioned for this one is Bloodborne, the board game. Now, I backed this one too, although I never played the game. I did, however, always skimmed videos of it, and they always looked epic. Like the video game gameplay and the trailers looked very, very cool, looked very clean. It always looked very engaging with combat. I always liked how fun and detailed it looked overall. Plus the cover art here with the whole silhouette main character, and then inside is like the setting of the game. White, clean, aesthetically pleasing board game cover. Love that. So this game is from CMON. Of course, it's going to be miniature heavy. I didn't go all in this one because I'm starting to notice that despite how much I love the game and how much I'm interested in the game and how much I want everything, I don't really dive into expansions as much as I should be in games enough for me to warrant paying for all the expansions as well. Some exceptions to that I've noticed have been Small World. I played every single expansion for that one, along with Lords of Hellas. I've almost got through all the expansions for that as well. And Root was also one that I dived into all the expansions. But I have a ton of other games with a ton of other expansions here, and I just don't dive into them enough. But regardless, in this game, there is a crazy amount of production value as expected. In terms of gameplay, it looks like you're going to be fighting through beasts and monsters and some frenzied townfolk to survive the night. And your goal is to figure out where some of that madness is coming from. The combat in this game is said to be card driven with no dice, and for me, I actually like a little bit of randomization when it comes to battle, especially because it provides some kind of surprise. I like being able to strategize, but I like the whole little element of surprise that's introduced in battle because it just keeps you on your toes, and it just, if things don't work out for you, that's okay. I just like that little slip of chance that we have. So I am interested in seeing in full how the system is going to work with full strategy. But from what I can gather by looking at it here, it looks like your character has access to 3 different attacks, and each can be modified with cards that you choose depending on the monster that you're fighting. Now, I didn't see whether you get to keep these modifiers permanently with each battle and to also see which rewards you're gaining from battle overall, but the combat mechanics are for sure interesting and they do feel very video game like. There's also so much content here because there are 4 different campaigns and each of them has 3 chapters. The major thing I am worried about though is again player interaction, because even if you are exploring the city together, I'm assuming you're also fighting the monsters together as well. I just think it'd be cool, since it is like a dark themed game, if players can somehow get infected or something, if that's not already implemented in the game, and then you have to end up fighting each other, because I just love confrontation in games and I just think it makes overall gameplay that much more fun. So hopefully something like that is implemented in Bloodborne. I'm excited for it too. I backed it as well. And we have a couple more from Instagram. So the next one, number 8, is Sea of Legends, mentioned to me by Shrink to Fit. Now this one is supposed to be a open world tabletop game. Now conceptually, I think that sounds very cool for a board game to have this open world concept, but I just don't know what quote open world actually entails, because you already do have games where as you're exploring, you're revealing tiles and you have multiple, objectives from battle to like a resource collection to city development, and in turn would have multiple paths to victory as well. But those aren't specifically titled quote open world. So I'm just interested in knowing what the difference is between all of those games that already have all of those features versus a board game that is specifically titled open world. To clarify my point a little bit more, it's like, what's the difference between an open world tabletop game versus like an adventure territory control game? However, I am very excited to know that we are getting more pirate themed games. I feel like we've definitely lacked in that department for some reason. And it looks like in this game, you're going to be playing as 1 out of 4 distinct captains, and you're going to be able to raid ports, bury treasure, fall in love, and defeat your nemesis. Everyone is trying to compete to become the most legendary pirate. And one really cool feature I love about this is that there are multiple paths to victory. Always a big hook for me for board games. I love board games with multiple ways to win. Now, in terms of action, it looks like each turn you can attack. You can also visit a port or go on an adventure. And during your attack, you're going to be gathering dice and utilizing crew members for your ship, using items and lever abilities to gain an advantage while at the mercy of mythical monsters and evil empires. Now that sounds incredibly fun, because it's the first time that I'm hearing you get to finally use or utilize your pirate crew. Other pirate themed games, yes, you're looking for treasure and you're fighting out on the open sea, but one really big aspect of these pirate themed games that I feel like have been missing, one that I have yearned for in pirate themed board games, is to actually use your crew. Like if your captain was the strongest one with the strongest ability, and then all of your crew members that you can kind of gather and recruit have just minor abilities that kind of augment your pirate captain's ability, that synchronization would be super, super cool. Either way, I think they're going along a very, very interesting line here of recruiting armies to fight with, and I'm very excited to see that Sea of Legends is finally bringing the aspect to the table. Now, other than this, you have multiple captain minis, which I hope are utilized to be part of the game instead of just for looks alongside the player board. Lots of very, very interesting and unique factions, from you have the Spanish Armada to the British Empire, the Dread Tide, and even the Children of Tlaloc. That looks like a version of Mer People. I think that's freaking awesome. I'm not an expert on miniatures at all. I just know that there's, from what I've seen so far, is that there's a group that are more rigid and more texturized, and those are the ones that I really, really like. But there are also these like really, really smooth ones that are kind of bendable. I'm not too big of a fan on like the smooth ones. There's just something about these smooth, bendable ones that kind of put me off, but it's not a big deal. I don't know if it's because one is like put in a cast and one is kind of 3D printed, but if any of you know what I'm talking about, please feel free to explain down below. I would love to hear a full detailed explanation about this. But overall, the game looks great. Production quality looks fantastic. Lots of very, very unique perspectives being brought in on the pirate theme here, and I can see why it is one of your most anticipated games for sure. Now, moving on to number 9, and that is Endless Winter by TT Tabletop. I don't know if this is intentional, but I am loving the fact that there are many winter-themed games mentioned right now during winter, just in general, because the whole blue and white color palette that instantly just pulls me into the game. It looks so clean. But more importantly, Endless Winter is about guiding the development of your tribe across many generations. You're going to be starting from 10,000 BCE. and you'll be settling in new lands. You'll also be making cultural traditions, hunting large megafauna, and building megalithic structures. Now on your turn, it looks like you'll have culture cards that gain benefits, and these also serve as combos later in the game. So it seems like they serve more than just as resource generators. Now what I found interesting and unique is that you're going to be setting some cards face down, and those are going to be revealed at the end of the round, where there's a phase called the Eclipse phase. And during that phase, those cards are revealed, and whoever set the strongest cards during that time is going to become the first player next turn. Now I think that's potentially a very, very fun mechanic to introduce into player choice, because it makes you think, right? It makes you wonder about, okay, which cards and how much of my resources should I use to gain priority? I think when you're making players choose between resource allocation and like priority to the next set of resources, I can see this mechanic being really, really fun and a very, very unique aspect to decision making as well. So I like that one. It sounds interesting, it looks great, and I am particularly interested about that last mechanic that I just mentioned. So all of those are from Instagram. Now let's go ahead and move on to everyone from Twitter. I'll also put a link down below if you want to see the Twitter thread, because there were a ton of responses and I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. They're just completely at random. So one of the games from number 10 is from Alex Schmidt, who mentions ISS Vanguard. Super hot game right now. From the get-go, it is from Awakened Realms, and I already have really high expectations for this game because they make fun, huge games, and they have an insane table presence. Like Lords of Hellas, if you've seen how outrageous I went for filming this video, I'll link it up here. One of my favorite games of all time. I'm going to talk about it a lot, constantly probably, because I really enjoyed it. You know, it's by far one of my all-time favorites. And, you know, also back the latest Nemesis. I have Tainted Grail here, still in shrink wrap. I'm also waiting for Etherfields. So they make really fun games, and I love their games overall. However, with that said, co-ops aren't my favorite cup of tea. I'm not too big on scenario-based games because usually that also means that they are cooperative. And our group, in particular, our gaming group, when we could play together, we're very competitive. So there's that. And also kind of just like space themes. I'm not big on space themes either. I don't love them as much as I do with like fantasy and medieval and nature woodsy type games. I actually don't have any space themed games currently, but I did back Hyperspace and Nemesis. So those are two games that will be added to my space theme collection. But it would be funny to see this game change my mind about all three of those aspects. But let's talk about this one. So ISS Vanguard is a 1 to 4 player co-op campaign. Everyone has an asymmetric team, and they're called sections. You have security, you have recon, science, and engineering. And you'll also be recruiting new members, researching materials, producing equipment, having ships that are modular, and there's just a ton of stuff overall for this epic scaled game. The first component that stood out for me actually weren't like specifically the minis, but what was on one of the miniatures, and that was this shield. It was how they're able to physically manifest a shield in tabletop form. I think it's so flippin' cool because lots of futuristic games always use structures that involve defense, but we never see like the kind of transparent shield that is covering the structure, or like if it projects a defensive shield, it's not something that you can visualize. But I think it's so cool and so smart how they showed this defensive shield in a tabletop form. I think it's freaking awesome, and I hope that others will utilize this effect as well, because I just love those details and I love that in this game. I also think it was cool how they used a shade of light to highlight each team that you have instead of just sticking a colored base on them. Like for engineering, for instance, here we have like a yellow light just hovering over them, whether it was actually done in the photo or in post. Those are the kind of details that I really like, and I just love that kind of stuff. It just really adds to the whole campaign and the board game in general for me. But anywho, everything looks good in this game. They even managed to make a mini of like a 3D intersecting planetary ring, which is mind-blowing, in this builder called a metahedron. The monsters look absolutely insane, and overall it seems like you're jumping into a 1 to 2 hour scenario and you are exploring planets, gearing up, finding loot. It just looks like a box full of epic space themed content. So if you like space themed games, I am sure that you would want to pick up this one as well. Definitely look out for this one in 2021. And speaking of amazing publishers, the next one I'm also a big fan of, and that is from Leader Games. So Sam from Lord of the Board, what's up Sam? Mentioned Oath from Leader Games. Yes, I absolutely backed this one within the first minute that Oath was launched. Now this game is for 1 to 6 players, and you're trying to write history in an ancient land. You're going to be populating the world with lots of characters and institutions, and most everyone starts as an exile who lives on the edge of society. And they win the game by directly challenging the Chancellor. So one player is going to be the Chancellor, and they win by maintaining grip on the Empire. So that's how it is conceptually. Now, Leader Games, or is it Ledger Games? Leader Games, they take a very interesting spin on legacy games, because even though Oath is not specifically defined as one, I think they make some very interesting elements about it. Because once you play Oath, the following game you play after that is affected by the result of the previous game. But games are not permanently affected by past choices. So Oath isn't a legacy, but it does take one element of it and make it unique, because setup and gameplay is going to be different depending on who won the last game. And in terms of components, they actually compared it directly to Roots. So there's basically a lot more of it. Bigger box, more cards, neoprene mat, double the amount of screen printed pieces that they're known for. Amazing artwork, again, by Kyle Farron, of course, and they also have some metal coins and magic as upgrades. There's a lot to dive into, and I am confident that Oath is going to be a big hit in 2021 as well. So thanks for mentioning this one, Sam. We're going to move on to number 12 here. So we're halfway through, and this one is from Cristiano Marquez, who mentions Frostpunk. See? Not the only one who is excited about Frostpunk. It's looking good. But another one mentioned was also Catapult Kingdoms. Now this is a 2-player game, but you can modify it for 3 to 4 players. Now it's very simple. You pretty much just pick 2 sides, and you're going to physically build up your castle and then focus on literally launching cannons at each other's fort. So right away, if you have kids, this is going to be a great entryway, or even just a great game in general for them. The components, the artwork, the simple but engaging gameplay is all very, very family friendly. Looking at all the add-ons here is pretty nuts. They have like a giant volcano with magma boulders. Like one of the winning conditions is like a classic kid imagination, or adults too, that's fine. But the whole like floor is lava. Like, so if one of those fireballs roll all the way through your castle, then it is an instant loss. And actually, thinking about that, my niece right now is going through that particular phase. She's like running on everywhere saying, the floor is lava, the floor is lava. So I think it's super interactive. I think I can see kids easily falling for this game. They're going to love this one, and it's going to push them to think too, because they'd have to keep reworking their castles and building the castles in different ways, and it gets their gears grinding. And I can see it being highly replayable on family nights, maybe sometimes even 2 replayable. Now, next one, number 13, my favorite number, is mentioned to me by Derek of Domerhu, who says the PS5. Yeah, I know there's this whole mess going on with the whole PS5 ordering system, but for me, I would have gotten it for Spider-Man 2 with Miles Morales. But the thing is, for me, I still have to finish up Final Fantasy 7, and I still haven't even touched God of War yet. I actually did an unboxing video of the PS4. It was like my second video that I did on this channel, but that was on the Spider-Man edition of the PS4 that I got. But yeah, Derek, I hope you got your hands on a PS5. If not, hopefully soon. But we'll count number 13 from Gamer's Genie, who mentions Lizard Wizard. Now, in Lizard Wizard, you're going to be competing to recruit wizards from different schools of magic. You're going to be building different mage-themed structures and researching spells, and do everything mage-like. Now, this one is an engine builder, and there are other mechanics like set collection and even an auction, which is interesting, and also has a solo mode as well. Now, it looks like there are a bunch of actions that you can perform on your turn. And the main thing I was wondering about actually comes down to the 7 schools of magic that they're showing here. So I'm hoping that each school of magic does have a significant amount of impact on gameplay. Hopefully it's not just for lore. Like, for instance, one of the schools is necromancy, who focuses on the dark magics of death and animating and controlling the undead. Hopefully that's a big part of gameplay as well. But aside from that, the artwork is very different. It's stunning. The details and everything is just freaking mind-blowing. I think for any kind of mage alchemy themed crafting games, it's also important to think about all of the resources and reagents you're using, since that's what you associate with like these fantasy games. And Lizard Wizard nails that with metal coins and custom shaped reagents. The only thing is with these summoning circles, which act as achievement markers. I don't think we're gonna be playing the game in a dim enough setting, light setting, for us to be able to see that illumination. But it is interesting and it is very unique. So hopefully there will be a time and place where a lot of the structures in the future for a board game night will be illuminated and kind of glowing. I think that'd be really interesting and fun. But overall, I love mage themed games. Every single game, MMORPG I've ever played, I've always mained a mage. So of course I'm gonna love mage themes in board games, especially since the entire game is revolved around that as well. Number 14 is Jessica of Tabletop Jess, who mentions Eternal Palace from Alley Cat Games. They're the same publishers as Dice Hospital, if you've heard of that game. It is coming to Kickstarter in the first quarter of 2021, so we don't know too much about it just yet, but it sounds like this one is going to be a worker placement game. The cover art is really nice. Looks like it has a Japanese theme to it, since the artist is wearing a kimono and there are also cherry blossoms. But here's what we know so far. Eternal Palace is a highly interactive, medium weight dice placement Euro game. You are a loyal worker and a skilled artist who has pledged to help the Emperor rebuild his palace after a devastating earthquake, so that you may gain his favor. You have to send your team to collect resources and build monuments, and you'll also honor the Emperor by painting a beautiful picture of his beloved gardens and palace. But there are others trying to impress him as well, and only one will have the honor of being chosen as the Emperor's favorite. Okay, so it looks like the workers are dice, so yes, it is a worker placement. It has dice rolling, and it looks like you'll be building different monuments and competing with other players to claim them as your own. So it definitely looks like a casual game, and I'm excited to find out more about this one next year. Now, next one, Hey Nixie mentions, anything I get to play when we safely reinstate gaming sessions. Now, a few of you did mention that in the thread, and you know, honestly, I agree. I barely get a chance to play games, mostly because we could barely get our group together even before the pandemic. So once the pandemic did hit, you know, playtime just went almost to zero. It's always fun to film games and to take pictures of games for me, but I obviously love playing them as well. So hopefully next year, 2021, a lot of us can get together and finally play games again for board game night. So the 15th title mentioned was from Mohammed Sob. Actually listed a bunch of really great titles, but if I were to pick one from this list, it would be Ankh. I loved Rising Sun, and knowing that Ankh is along the same lines as Rising Sun, but with an Egyptian theme, oh my god, I am so super stoked for that one. And I actually had a really cool idea with this one. The way I wanted to film it was actually to be put into sand dunes. I wanted to do some like drone shots of the game with some sand dunes, but obviously 2020, hard for us to be traveling or doing anything anywhere. But hopefully I can do a video photo session with some sand dunes with either Ankh or Cleopatra in the future. But real quickly, Ankh is by Simon. Huge game, tons of production value, and an army of miniatures that are themed around Egypt. Now, this is another game designed by Eric Lang, who is a mastermind behind his craft. I know this game is going to be really fun because you're going to be using unique powers, huge armies. The land evolves differently to the choices that you make from what I was getting about the game. And you'll be building epic monuments, and it's just going to be an insane scale of board game fun. That's all there is to it. It's gonna be great. I am for sure looking forward to it in 2021, and I also backed it as well. Next one from Moodle Doodle says he's still trying to catch up to old ones, man. Same, honestly, same. Half of the games in my shelf is still unplayed and shrink wrapped. Bad on me, I know. But 16 is from Frag Daddies, who mentioned Unmatched Marvel Anything. Yes, I am a huge Marvel fan, if it isn't apparent already. The whole comic book universe, movie universe, everything Marvel. I haven't played any of the Unmatched games just yet, but I know Unmatched is about a miniature dueling game, and there are like different legends from across history, like Bruce Lee, Jurassic Park, Bigfoot. It's pretty crazy, and I do want to dive into these games eventually, especially knowing that it's getting a Daredevil skin makeover, because it was my favorite show from the Netflix series. I know there's also going to be a Luke Cage one, I think. And maybe others are getting their own Unmatched game as well. So definitely looks like an interesting one. Okay, so we have 5 more games to get through on this list. Let's do it. Number 17 is by Angela Ferris. One of them that was mentioned was Red Sea, the conflict in the Horn of Africa. Now, I think this is a spin-off, like a bite-sized version of Twilight Imperium. So when I first started getting into this hobby, and I always looked at, you know, top 10 lists, top 100 lists, I always saw this at the very top of Board Game Geek. But the thing is, I never really took a chance at it because it just looked very intimidating, and the artwork looks very old, like I mentioned earlier. I'm not too big on historical political games, but I am sure there's a reason why Twilight Imperium has been ranked #1 on the top board game list for a very, very long time. So it's nice to hear that it is getting a bite-sized, manageable version, just like Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. But it looks like this bite-sized version is going to have cards that are compatible with the original game. But the full title of this game is Twilight Struggle, Red Sea Conflict in the Horn of Africa, and it's about the Soviet Union and the US being locked in battle. I'm not totally sure on full game mechanics just yet, but it looks like it's a card game, and most of the information I was trying to find out about it was mostly historical context. So I'm actually very unaware about how the game plays. But if it is a spin-off and a bite-sized version of such a big title, and it's going to be more accessible to way more players, then I can easily see why it is your most anticipated game for 2021. Now, since we just mentioned Gloomhaven, that's a nice segue to number 18. Number 18 is from Spidey268. Love that username. Mentions Oath and Frosthaven. See, this is what like the third game we mentioned now about the whole winter color palette theme. It's not a coincidence. Now, Frosthaven was one of the biggest, actually I think it is the biggest board game that's ever been funded on Kickstarter. It actually might have been one of the biggest projects that were ever funded on Kickstarter in general. And that is so exciting for the hobby. I'm so happy that more and more people are getting into board games. But Frosthaven is part 2 to Gloomhaven, if you don't know already. I never played Gloomhaven, so I did back Frosthaven alone because it just looks really fun. Like along with Tainted Grail, I think it's one of the few campaign games that I would be willing to play for sure. I think this is also one of the most massive games, both literally and figuratively, that we talk about today. So it has to be one of the top games next year, no doubt about it. Still though, there are standees for this game. If you know me and you know this channel, you know standees are like my Achilles heel for board gaming, in a sense that I'm not the biggest fan of standees, but I get it. If there were miniatures for this, it's probably gonna end up being like 3 times the box size, on top of like 3 times the cost as well. So for Frosthaven, I'll make an exception. Now we can talk about Frosthaven for hours on end, but real quickly, if you are unfamiliar, it's a campaign game. You're gonna be adventuring with your hero with very, very deep storylines, and you're fighting through a bunch of scenarios. Like there's over 100 scenarios in this board game alone, and that is a ton of game time. So it may seem like an expensive game at first, but if you calculate all the time spent and how much game time you're actually getting from playing this game, most won't even manage to finish this one. It's gonna be well worth the cost for sure. Okay, and the final 3 games from today. Semi-co-op, number 19, mentions the Wildlands co-op expansion. I think this is the one you're talking about, the one that's called The Ancients. I haven't heard about the Wildlands until now, but it looks like it's right up my alley because it's a full-blown action PvP confrontational game. You take control of 1 out of 4 factions. You have unique play styles and decks. It sounds like a really fun tactical game where there are multiple events taking place. And there are, of course, multiple paths to victory as well. You know, from being the first to go for the crystals or just straight out attacking other players, that's me. So it sounds engaging, it sounds fun, it sounds combative, it sounds super interactive, and the expansion looks like it's going to address some of the ancient guardians who have awoken from their secret vault. And now, instead of fighting each other, you'll be teaming up to take this one down, or take them down. Now, I think that's a fun way to navigate the expansion. I think it's really cool how you've built up all of these memories and gameplay and just history with the base game with all your friends, and then you're now going to have to team up together to face a common threat, just like a comic book movie. It's different. I always like it when games are putting their unique spin on things and throwing you curveballs and just making things really fun. So overall, it looks fantastic. Number 20 is from Board Game Feast, who mentions the 15 Kickstarters that they're also anticipating. Again, completely agree. I actually think I did pretty good this year. I went with maybe between 8 to 10 games that I've backed this year. But that's also not counting the ones that I backed from 2018 that still haven't arrived just yet. So anywho, he mentions the new Descent. That one's also mentioned by a couple others as well. Now, Descent is a dungeon crawler. It also has a companion app. Now, the only game I played so far with an app is Night of the Werewolf. So it is interesting to see that a full-blown narrative is a direction to where board games are leaning towards now. Call me old school, but I still like physical components. It's probably why I don't like playing Tabletop Simulator. So hopefully Descent can still be standalone without the app, but I do like the option there for solo play. Now, enemies in this dungeon crawler are said to be adaptable. That's interesting because normally they've always had like set stats and set ways of movement. Like sometimes you'll just roll a die for an enemy to move. So I am interested in understanding what adaptable to them means. This kind of just hit me, but if there's a way for apps to kind of double check how you're playing and making sure you're playing correctly and kind of just scan over your board game gameplay and just see where you are in the game and making sure that you are along the right track, and even like tabulate how many points everyone has, that'd be super awesome. I know there was an app that kind of attempted something similar to that, but in the future, I think it'd be really cool to see apps do like a rule check for you, because right now we don't really have any way to make sure that we're playing the game correctly every single time. If we do, it is very cumbersome. But there was that checklist feature that I mentioned in my how to write a board game rulebook video. Anyways, moving on, we have 6 heroes to choose from in this one. They're all unique in abilities and stats, and overall it does remind me of like a tabletop form of Diablo, which is amazing because I love Diablo. You can also craft weapons which are open to modification. Now hopefully they are open to modification through abilities as well, and they're not just static stats. And yeah, this is going to be one epic dungeon crawler next year, 100%. And lastly, but surely not least, number 21 to finish off the list for today is from Gaming Trent, who mentions Perseverance. Yes, I actually did cover this game actually in a past podcast episode when the campaign was live. But yeah, survival on a dinosaur island, and it's by Mind Clash Games, who also did Cerebria. I love that game. Tons of cool dinosaurs and soldier minis, very organized trays, high quality components overall, even like squishy green berries like Everdell. Love that. The part that drew me into backing this game was actually the whole evolution mechanic. I get this. Your character ages as you progress in the game. When have you last played a game where your character ages with you? It's such a crazy and cool concept because you even have these representative minis that show them aging, which I just found like mind-blowing and just really cool. And with that, those are 21 of your, pretty much our most anticipated games for 2021. It is shaping up to be an epic year of board gaming. Hopefully it's going to be a year where we can enjoy it with all of our loved ones. Thank you to everyone who participated in this list and is still participating and showing me all your amazing games. I'm glad that you guys are showing me epic games to look out for. If I didn't get through yours today, I'm sorry. I just randomly picked through the list from Twitter. And with that, thank you all so much for being here, for listening to the episode, and I'll see you all in the next one.